Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Sister Carolyn. We're glad y'all are here, everybody. And we want to remember, I guess it would be appropriate to pray for Lauren and Patrick. What do you think, Mindy? They got a mess at their house this morning with some failed. Yeah, they got some failed plumbing. That's a mess. Those 5 that we just mentioned before we went on air, that Brother Jay Williams and 4 of the young folks that are in Africa, we want to remember them. And they'll be there till they're coming back a week from Monday. So they'll be preaching in Africa for a few days. And all right, got our folks trickling in. Any other prayer requests? Milton? That's a good. Yes. And we have a lot. What?
Your sister just had a baby?
Yeah,
Today? Like last night?
an hour ago.
Oh, right.
What's that?
His sister just had a baby this morning.
Oh my goodness. Wow. Well, that's good. Congratulations, Uncle. Uncle Jesse. All right. Pass the mic to Sister Faye, and let's go to prayer.
Our Heavenly Father, we're so thankful to be in your house this morning, dear Lord. We know there are people that has things going on, disasters and all, that would love to be in church, but we feel privileged to be here, dear Lord. Just be with each one that prayer was requested for, dear God. Just, you know, we might not know all the reasons, but you know them. Just be in our service this morning, that someone will get something that they can go home and feast on during the week. Just the ones that are sick and can't be here, dear Lord, and other things, just be with them. And we'll be thankful and give you the praise. Amen.
Turn in your Bibles with me to book of 1 Timothy. We're in the 2nd chapter of the book of 1 Timothy. Paul the Apostle, good morning. Paul the Apostle wrote the majority of the books of the New Testament. I don't know the number, I didn't look that up, but of all the books that he wrote, all of them were addressed to a church in a specific location, with the exception of 2. 1st and 2nd Timothy, and then right following them, the book of Titus. They were the only personal letters that are in the New Testament that he wrote. Everything else was to a church in general. And so this is a personal letter. As Brian brought out last week and the week before, he was writing to a young minister to strengthen him in the faith, and to give him counsel on how to take care of the church of God that had been left in his care. That was a lot. It is a lot. It's a lot to take care of. I don't know the size of the congregation or anything like that. And with any church, we get into. All right, I'm going to back up a little bit. We know that Christ died for the church. It says that in the book of Ephesians. He loved the church, and he gave himself for the church. So, in the church, the big confines, you almost have two lines of thought. One is that the church has got the church covered, and I'm going to step over here and I'm going to go preach to the world that's not in the church. Does that make sense? And then you've got the other group is we're going to work, promote, cherish, preserve the church that Christ died for. And sometimes with those two lines of thought, there comes a sense of conflict. Because those that are over here that have a call, and this is, I guess I'm still on my Wednesday night subject a little bit, we've been studying the call of God in your life. And so for those that feel called to go around the world and say, you know, it could be in your city, it doesn't have to be Africa, it could be downtown Albany, it could be wherever. And this has been this way all of my life. There were some people, they don't want to be under the church. They want to be independent. They want to do their own thing. That's just where they are called to flourish. And so they kind of sometimes, you know, it can feel like there's a conflict between the two groups. But in reality, there should
be harmony there.
There should be harmony. And I guess you go into the, Paul the Apostle was called to the Gentiles. He was called to preach and teach to the Gentiles.
There's balance. There has to be balance because
Sister Faye's almost throwing you the mic.
there has to be balance because if you're so focused on outreach, then you neglect those who need nurturing. There's still a congregation that needs to grow, that needs nurturing, that needs admonition, that needs exhortation. And if the entire focus is focused on outreach, then you neglect those who are already sanctified. And yes, and the opposite is also true. If you're only focused on those who are within, who have already become sanctified, and the nurturing and the admonition, and there's never any outreach, eventually you're going to die off. So there has to be a balance.
Well, the same Paul, Brian, I agree with you, the same Paul that was called to the Gentiles, we all know in the back of our Bible you got the maps of Paul's 3 missionary journeys. You've all seen the map. Or he went here and here and here and here and here and here and come back. We also have a record of those 3 missionary journeys in the book of Acts. But the same guy that did that traveling, that was preaching to the Gentiles, also said in the 10th chapter of Romans, brethren, my heart's desire and prayer to God for Israel is that they might be saved. That was his people. So he was out preaching, but yet his heart, and there's more than this, I'm skimming over it, but his heart was for Israel. Now, there was a time in my life, a long time, before Leesburg, everything before Leesburg, where we spent our life on the road, evangelizing, going. We were not dependable to stay in our home crowd all the time. We were gone at least once a month for years, for decades. And that obviously changed when God sent us here. And so I'm not saying any of this for self-glory. I don't want y'all to misunderstand me. Lord help, no. But I've seen both sides of the coin. I've lived it. I've lived both sides of the coin. And it's easy when you're going out and you're evangelizing, it's easy to feel like you're doing more than the folks that are staying at home. I know what I'm talking about. And maybe get a little bit of attitude about it if you're not careful, you know? But if while you're gone preaching, If somebody's not staying home and keeping the church, there's nothing for you to come home to. So it's like, there's people that love to vacation, right? Let's use that as an example. Some folks love, they got a passport, they got the money, they like to travel. Go, 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 go. But you know what? At some point, you're ready to go where? Home. And while you were gone on your trip, hopefully your house didn't just fall apart. Maybe you had somebody taking care of it. It's kind of a little bit of an analogy there. So here in this book of 1 Timothy is where we're reading, in the 2nd chapter. And see, ding, we're ready to go. All right, we're talking about in this 2nd and 3rd chapter that we're going to go into, or these 2 chapters are specifically to Timothy, to how to take care of the church of God, how things ought to be done in the church. There has to be in the church a chain of command. It has to be in any organization. You know it professionally, in your workplace, and you don't go above. If you want to get to the top, you go through the chain of command, right? And so in the church, there's 5 offices that are specifically mentioned, and we'll come to that. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's go. We're going to jump into this juicy part first. We left off at the last Sunday. Brian must have known I was going to teach today because he left the really good stuff for me. We're going to start in the 9th verse, and we need a woman to read this verse. Mindy, would you read, let's see, I guess read 9 through the end of the chapter. Yeah, we don't need a man to read this.
In like manner also, that women adorn themselves in modest apparel, with shamefacedness and sobriety, not with broided hair, or gold, or pearls, or costly array, but which becometh women professing godliness with good works. Let the women learn in silence, with all subjection. But I suffer not a woman to teach, nor to assert authority over the man, but to be in silence. For Adam was the first formed, then Eve. And Adam was not deceived, but the woman being deceived was in the transgression. Notwithstanding, she shall be saved in childbearing if they continue in faith and charity and holiness with sobriety.
Would any of you women like to comment on that passage? It's almost ironic that I'm standing here as a man going to tell you women about how y'all ought to behave. This is a controversial passage in many places. There are people that take this literally.
Wasn't this written, though, it was written back in a time when they were having a lot of the women questioning and raising stuff during the church sermons, and he was saying, hey, look, y'all need to chill out, in silence, because they were causing discord in the church.
I think so. And I don't know why it was more out of proportion in that church than in others, that he addressed and didn't talk about it in other churches like he did here. There are people that take this literally when it says, let's get down to the 11th verse, let the women learn in silence. And the 12th verse, I allow, the word suffer means allow. I allow not a woman to teach or to assert authority over the man, but be in silence. When we were first married 45 years ago, we were living in Charlotte, small crowd, and Sister Ruth Price, she had her hair in a bun. Y'all, for those that didn't know her, very strict lady, came from that old school in our church. And she was in the mall and bumped into another lady dressed very similarly. And they got to talking, and that lady went back to her group, and they came to meeting with us. They came to a service, And they wanted, they asked us if we would come to their house to talk with them about doctrine and scripture. So Brother Leon Stewart, Brother Donnie Roebuck, Rosh Bennett's daddy, Brother Roy Bennett Sr., and myself went to this group of folk that were holiness, strict, outward dress. And we walked in this house. I was 20 years old. I remember it like it was last night. And it's been 45 years ago. We walked in their house, and there were probably 35 people in the house. I mean, it was in a house. That's a lot. And the entire hour and a half we were there, the women never opened their mouth. It was heaven on earth, Pat. No, I'm just kidding. And then we got into a lot of doctrinal things that we didn't agree on, second coming and whatnot. And when we left, now this is a group, and I'm just reporting what happened. This was a group that took most things literally out of the Bible. So there's another verse that talks about if any man comes into your house and brings not this doctrine, don't receive him, don't bid him, what's the word? Don't bid him, I can't think of it. Godspeed, don't bid him Godspeed, it says in the Bible. Don't say, bless you, because there's a conflict of doctrine. When we got ready to leave, they would not shake our hands. That was bidding us Godspeed, Mindy. We went, well, we enjoyed it. It's awkward. I'll walk up to Mike and do like this and he just runs. And he doesn't go back and shake my hand. So they came out one more time. They came to service one more time after that. About 4 of their guys, 4 or 5 of their men, not the women. And whoever was running the meeting gave Becky the Bible that night. And we didn't wait, back then the preacher would go ahead and get out first part of the meeting. And Becky got out to the stand, and the instant we stopped singing, the instant she opened her mouth, they got up and they walked out. And she started crying. You ask her about it, she vividly remembers that as well. She was 24 years old. And so there's people that take this very literally about the women keeping silence in the church. Now, the verse before that, let's talk about verse 9 for a little bit. We're not going to bear down on this because you guys go along. You guys are doing this. In like manner also, verse 9 of 1 Timothy chapter 2, that women adorn themselves in modest apparel with shamefacedness and sobriety, meaning being, it's not talking about sober. It's not talking about not drinking. It's talking about a sober mind. It's not, you can be a cut up or you can be sober minded, right? Sometimes we do a little bit of both, but it's talking about that when it says here with shamefacedness and being sober. This is serious about serving God. Not with broided hair or gold or pearls or costly array. Now that verse is the main verse probably that our church does not believe in jewelry and has extended it to wedding rings. I'm not knocking anybody with a wedding ring. I'm not picking on nobody. I'm just talking about why our church came to have a position on that. And as with most things I want to say this in the right way, but I also want to be honest. Whenever you take a stance against things, the attitudes and viewpoints about things change over the years. So when they took a stance, the church, when I say they, the elders of our church, when they took a stance, it's in our original discipline that there will be no wedding rings in our wedding ceremonies, that we don't believe in jewelry, and they named I don't know if it's in that newer discipline or not, but the discipline I grew up with as a kid, I got one out there in my truck. It specifically names things, breast pins and brooches or whatever, you know, I don't even know all the terms for it all. But it names specific things in our church discipline that, and it seems like you could almost say, well, it's unfair, it's always about the women, you know? And so the church position on those things and other things are not, the church's position is not as hard as it used to be. When I grew up, if you had a television, you could not preach at camp meeting. That was not in writing. That was one of the unwritten silent rules. You could preach in your home crowd. You know, if they preached you here, you know, that was okay. But when you went to camp meeting, there was a time, a long time, if you had a television, you were not allowed to preach at camp meeting. Obviously, that's no longer the case.
Well, then you have to say, no cell phone, because you can get more on cell phone.
Well, about 20 years ago, I was talking to Brother Steve Gray at camp meeting, and he said, and probably he had read this somewhere, I don't think any of us were technologically advanced to know this. I think he probably had read it. But he said, I think there'll come a day when you'll have one cable go in your house that'll do everything. Telephone, well, yeah, that's obviously happened, right? Get a MediaCom cable, you got TV, you got internet, you got phone, you got everything. All right, so get back to this issue. The things can change. Now, there's some things that don't, there's some things that don't change. What would they be? Don't let that board member have that mic. No, I'm messing with you.
So the issues that he was dealing with here are the same, but they're also different. So it was a cultural practice for women to wear extremely elaborate hairdos.
Broided hair.
Broided hair.
what
And
he
it's
calls
not talking about just braiding your hair. They would,
Put jewels in their hair.
they had jewels in their hair. They would have artwork in their hair. They would have, just extremely elaborate hairdos. And it was a sign of wealth.
Yeah.
They would use it.
Status.
They would use it as status. They would use it against one another. You know, I look better than you. I'm better than you. I'm richer than you. It was not a sign of modesty, right? It was meant for somebody to stare at and to look at, to draw attention. And so the issue in all of this is modesty
That's correct.
and moderation. Paul preaches over and over about moderation. And it's moderation not only in our attire, but in our life, in our lifestyle. Everything needs to be moderate and modest. And so this modesty that he's talking about here with apparel, it really goes deeper than what is, it's a condition of the heart. What is the desire to be flashy? Where does that stem from? Where does, it's not about what you're wearing, it's about the intent behind it. Because what you're wearing says a lot about the intent. And if the intent is to draw attention to yourself, to be prideful, to look better than everyone else, then that is not something that becomes holiness. And that's really the key here in verse 10, which becometh women professing godliness.
Yeah.
Because that right there covers things.
Well, let's start off.
We don't
talking
have
about-
elaborate hairdos anymore.
Let's start off talking about the women adorn themselves in modest apparel. Let's start with that.
You know, Gary, when I think, and that particular verse has always, I think everybody knows that my grandmother was Pentecostal holiness.
Yes.
And when she would come up to visit, she would go to church with me in Wilmington.
Yeah.
And I remember after I reached that age of accountability, the first time I cut my hair, she gave me a scorn.
Wow.
Things change over the years,
Right.
but some of the things that are convictions to me
Yeah.
might not be a conviction to somebody else.
Right.
Like, the lengths of our dresses, wearing sleeveless dresses, whatever is a conviction for me. And, even looking back at the old videos of the church, back when they had the VHS tapes and went to DVDs, you could watch them, and I think now they're all online or something. But you can see back in the old days, 20 years ago,
Yeah.
there were no sleeveless dresses. There were no, because being modest is, to me, and it's my conviction, is not showing too much skin, not
That's right.
putting yourself out there
Absolutely.
to have eyes on you, like, look at me,
Absolutely.
and
You're-
because in my profession, I deal with that kind of stuff.
Yes.
And,
Yes.
I won't go into that, but that's, and we talk, exactly. And when we put ourselves in that position, again, my convictions, showing too much skin or acting certain ways or saying certain things or doing certain things, you're not portraying holiness anymore. Again, my convictions, not everybody else's,
Well, I
because
think-
things change.
You remind me, Christy, of, there was I think this was in the 60s, there was some lawsuit that went up to the Supreme Court, and they were trying to decide whether this certain thing was pornography or not. And one of the Supreme Court justices said, I can't define pornography, but I know it when I see it. Okay, same thing you could say about modesty. Maybe you can't put, some people I think have tried, some churches have tried to put a definition on it. When I see some of these, I'm going to say very, very strict Pentecostal holiness churches, you see these women out in public. Okay, they all look like the rubber stamp, right? They've got the denim skirts that go way down, and they've got the hair down to here. And in a sense, and I see this with them, it almost is like it's a competition of who can be the strictest, so it becomes this competition thing, right? And if I'm a sister, you're a sister, and you dared cut your hair or look, then I'm judging, Okay, let's get away from all that. Let's talk about what's common sense and what ought to be. Let's go back to the Garden of Eden for a split second. When Adam and Eve were created and formed, their minds and their hearts were pure. Anybody disagree with that? When they were first in the garden, they were living in paradise on earth. And when the serpent came along, and we just read, Adam was not deceived, verse 14, but the woman being deceived was in the transgression. Now, two things form a little bit of this passage of telling women to be silent and how to dress. Two thoughts behind it. One is the old school thought that woman was formed from man, right? So man was created first, and then, so there's a thought there, the woman a little bit under him, right? Because she was created from man. The second thought being, because of what happened in the garden, then it's that women are weaker than men. Adam was not deceived. The woman was deceived. So there's that thought process going on. That's kind of maybe where Paul was coming from with this thing, that man was superior, man was stronger. Okay, but think about this. When she crunched the apple and gave it to Adam, what's the first thing that happened to them? They realized they were naked. And what did they do? They went and covered it up. Before that, they were naked and didn't know it. And I think it's a safe thing to say, if any of us are naked, you know it. They didn't even know it. They didn't even know it. That's how pure their minds were. So, is it important as holiness people? My dad's got a saying of many, we call them Bernardisms. We could write a book on them. One of them is the average man can see better than he can think. Well, is it holiness for women to be up here or at Publix claiming to be holiness, that your attire's down to here and up to here? No, that's not holiness. No. Modesty. Now, back in the day, when I was in my 20s, so this would have been in the 80s, the shorts that men wore back then were not the baggy shorts down to here like we wear now. The shorts were up to here and they were tighter. That's all that we had. One year we drove to camp meeting, me and Becky and probably just Brian and Jeff, little. And I wore shorts and a t-shirt in my car on my trip and got to the campground and went to my cabin. I didn't go walking around the campground. And one of the elders of the church come over to drop in and chewed me out for wearing my shorts on the campground. Yeah. Immodest. That's what they thought. I never wore them out of my trailer. I didn't. I got blasted anyway.
I had on blue jeans, and I was at Sister Mom's River, whatever, and so they wanted me to go down to the home for some reason to get something or take something or something, I don't know. But I walked in with my blue jeans on, and whoever, this has been many years ago, so I don't know who was the, I recognize the name, but I can't think of the name. She told me, don't come in there wearing blue jeans anymore.
Yeah, well, these things, I don't know that there's any group, including us, that's going to get it all perfect. Let's be real about that. I think we need to have common sense and we need to understand. Look, I can't tell you specifically, now my wife will come, what do you think about this? Have to give an opinion. That's okay, she's my wife. But I can't go tell Sister Carolyn, you ought not, I'm not in that business. I'm not going to tell you. But we all know what immodesty is, right? And we all know, too, when people are doing things for themselves, for recognition. I've seen people act in church in a certain way to get attention. It felt like it didn't feel like it was spirit-led. So that's not right either. We're not here to be, it's not about me. Huh? That's right. That's immodest behavior. So when he talks here about gold and pearls, now our folks took that literally. We still pretty much are there. That line is probably getting a little fuzzy around the edges, to be honest with you. I don't want to get off on that. I got a lot of thoughts on that, but this is not the time. So the real message and theme I get out of this particular passage that Sister Mindy read, is to women. But the men don't get off either. The men can dress immodestly. The men can have wrong spirits and attitudes just as much as women. It's all about reflecting Christ in our actions, in our dress. Now, I will say, in case somebody watches this later from somewhere else, it's important for mothers and fathers to train their daughters. I've seen mothers that dressed modestly but allowed their daughters to dress immodestly. Look, we get together at feast meetings and camp meeting, and there are young women on the stand dressed inappropriately. Let's talk about it honestly. It makes me want to go to their parents and ask, what is wrong with you? Why are you allowing your daughter to be up there like this? Uncle Leon preached, I think it was 1984, I believe it was 84, an iconic sermon. And in it, one of the things he said was, he mentioned cocktail dresses on the stand. We ought not to have women dressed in cocktail dresses on the stand. And then I heard Uncle Joseph Clellan talk about you don't need to be dressed down to here and up to here. That's what he said. He preached that. It's not a thing, it's the look. It's what are we, like you said, I don't remember exactly how you said it, but you can dress in a way that reveals yourself and makes eyes come at you, right? That's that's designed to do, is designed to draw attention. And our attention should be that we're reflecting Jesus at all times. I mean, so let's go into the third chapter. Now that we got everybody straight on all that. Yes. Brother Jesse.
I do have one question. In watching, watching as a young boy growing up, watching my grandmother and my grandfather, and no, they were not churchgoers. My grandmother at that time was actually pretty heavy in going to church. My grandfather wasn't. And then I watched a lot of couples around us. So what is important to me is modesty is that's a common sense subject, really, to me. But what is not a common sense subject is the one that the church, I guess, isn't such a believing in. And that's the second lines of that, in silence and backing. I watched my grandmother always back my grandfather, but in silence. And that was one of those things that I grew up with. Now, obviously, Melinda and I are a completely different relationship than that. But in that, it formulated how strong she was for him. And he did some things he shouldn't have done, but she was so, her parents had instructed her in that manner. And that made him such a stronger man. Later in life, he repented of that. Like, I should not. He was 60 years old. I remember him talking to me about this when he was 60. So for only 15 years of his life, he realized what kind of man he should have been for her. But if she wasn't there backing him, there's no telling what he would have been like even later in his 60s. Right. But she was such a strong woman. And I think it goes back to a lot of this scripture. And the reason I bring that up is it's the worldview today and who we have to vote for. And I'm not going into that. But in reality, that's what I do not really kind of understand about the church. And I'm not saying I don't want to listen or teach. And I hear Aunt Nancy and I hear everybody that preaches in Aunt Becky. And I think I could learn a lot out of that. But that is the gray area to me, because I've seen where just watching from that marriage was stronger because of how willing she was to stay hushed but back him. Now, that doesn't mean it was right. But what I'm saying is that marriage, in those marriages at those point in times where the woman was really, look at who you brought up, Price, Jeff's mother and father. You can tell she's very strong, but I think in the household, from the just I've ever seen, she is strong but very backing of him. And I use that, and I'm like, that to me is also a worldly example, not worldly, but a godly example of who we should be in the world, is what I really mean by that. And so that's why I prefer to talk about those few subjects, because that to me, as I watched as a kid, I watched my mom and my father, and she was quick. I mean, she would talk, buddy, and they would butt heads all the time, and eventually that cost them their relationship. I mean, it was just she had a thought and it was coming out. And that butted a lot. Whereas my grandmother had thoughts and it was coming out, but she wouldn't talk to him that way. She just wouldn't.
Not in front of you.
No. And I don't, honestly, as a kid, I don't think she did it even as a younger, talking to my dad.
Well,
that's why my dad had such hard feelings for him. I mean, she wouldn't. She wouldn't.
Well, you've opened up another can of worms, and that's great. That's fine. Relationships and marriage, and I would encourage all of y'all. You can get this. You can find this on YouTube with a simple search, and that'd be the easiest way to listen to this sermon. A black minister named E.V. Hill, 2 initials, E.V. Hill. He pastored a church in South Central Los Angeles. And he preached his wife's funeral. After 40-some years of marriage, she died of cancer. It's I am passionate about good preaching and good sermons. It's one of the 2 or 3 best sermons I have ever heard in my entire life from anybody, anywhere about anything. And I would highly encourage everybody to go listen to that sermon. You can go to YouTube and just type in and I've got YouTube app on my phone. You don't have, it doesn't cost you anything to go to YouTube. And it's 2 letters, E.V. Hill, wife's funeral. It's all you got to type in. It's no audio, it's just audio. That's all you get. And it's about 30 minutes long. I would highly encourage you to listen to that sermon, Jesse, because the depth of their relationship is brought out, and the support of his wife for him when she didn't agree with him. There was one time, and I'll tell this quick story, one time he decided to open a gas station. And she said, I don't think that's a good idea. And he went ahead and opened it anyway. And he said, I lost my shirt. And she never said, I told you so, when she could have. So we've all had examples in front of us. We've learned how to have a marriage by what we grew up with as children. Not just our parents, but in my case, where we lived, where Dad still lives, the family named the Cranes lived next door. They were church-going, Baptist-going people. They had a godly household. I was in their house more than I was anybody but my own. And I watched their relationship as husband and wife. It was very similar to what I saw in my house. And now some people grow up in houses. I grew up thinking that because of my house and the way the Cranes were next door, I thought everybody's house was like that because they confirmed what I was growing up with, you know. They had a TV and we didn't, but that was about the biggest difference. And yet you grow older and you find out that there are people that grow up in abusive homes with horrible, their parents' marriage is terrible and they didn't grow up like I did. So you learn that. And in those cases, when you grow up in that kind of relationship, I think what you learn there is what not to do. Maybe when you get married yourself, you learn what not to do. Hopefully you do. Sometimes that's passed on because they just think that's the way it is. Yeah, and so that happened. I mean, everybody has a different childhood and experience. My dad's always, one of his Bernardisms is, he used to tell us, he'd say it with a straight face, I'm the head of this house. And then he'd kind of whisper, and your mother's the neck. There's a lot of truth in that too. Because the women can, now one thing I've learned, Brother Jesse, that I didn't know at your age, as much as I know it now, is that I, at your age, was going along, not doing a lot of listening to my wife at all times. And I've learned there's wisdom there if I'll listen. I have learned that. She is not trying to, she's not trying to take my job as head of the house. She's not trying to belittle me or berate me. She is actually trying to help me. We talked about Wednesday night, for those that weren't here, the call of God, that when God calls you to a work, that he's already factored your stupidity in. That's not my saying. I read that about 2 weeks ago and I busted out laughing. I'm like, whoo, man, makes me feel a lot better. And so I need help. That's why the wife is called the helpmate. Us men need help. We're limited. As one person said, men are cursed with testosterone at birth. And all the women said? So we learn as we go. I think we'll stop here. We don't, I really thought we, what? Hey, one of the best, and I mean this, and I've learned this. Us men, we fight not to lose that testosterone, right? Because that makes us a man. And as we get older, it's fact. It slowly drains out. And it makes us better men. I've seen it happen. I've seen it happen in generations above me, men that were very combative and authoritative and all that, and they became kinder and gentler as they got older. That's not a bad thing. And maybe we get a little bit of more wisdom when some of that testosterone leaves too. And part of it is listening to our wives. You know, Christy's about to get excited. We ain't even started church. Christy said, this is the best Sunday school class I've ever been in. Are we going to do more of this next Sunday, Brother Gary? Let's talk about that. No, I'm saying that at 65. I don't remember being Jesse's age, Brian's age, Mike's age, and anybody confessing any of that. But that's my experience, that hopefully we get a little wiser, and I think part of that wisdom is maybe our egos are not quite as large. When you get older, you kind of come more of an acceptance of how things are, and there's times, I'm not making this up, there's times that Becky says something, I'm like, whoa, that was she just dropped a truth bomb on me, you know, and I realized that was something I hadn't thought about. So the more we get along as wives and husbands and couples, I think the more we reflect Christ. And that's really what this whole passage was about. I'm going to stop with this. But this living for Christ, as Brother Harry would say, aren't you glad you're sanctified? Oh my goodness, man, I feel that way this morning. And in everything that we do, from how we dress, to how we interact with our spouse, to how we interact with each other in the congregation. Now listen, Mike and Chrissy have lived in several congregations as I have, and some of y'all have. Diane's been in 3. And every congregation has a different fingerprint. They're all different. And there are some congregations not as blessed as we are here. Because this congregation, unless I'm completely fooled, and I don't think I am, we've got love here, and there's not one group over here and one group over here. And I've seen this. Where there's friction in a congregation, and one group just doesn't like another group. And it's not just 2 or 3 don't like 2 or 3. I'm talking a group